Hello everybody, welcome to the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along live check-in. This is our recap of the Borders and Backgrounds challenge that we've been doing. Also a little Q&A and a little hint as to what's coming up next. And at the end, I'm going to tell you about a giveaway I have going on. So I hope you've enjoyed the 6-week challenge. We've been doing a lot of different designs, right? We've went from geometric to wavy to formal feathers and with everything in between. And so what I want to do before we get to the Q&A is just real quickly touch on different tips for quilting the borders of your quilts. Now, when it comes to working on borders, one of my least favorite things when it comes to quilting quilts, one of my least favorite things is quilting the borders. There's something about getting to the end of the quilt and having that big chunk of border left to do. I'm so over the quilt at that point, so I think that's probably the only reason I get a little crazy about it. Just going to stop in real quick and make sure everybody can hear me. I figure if people can't hear me, they'll let me know pretty quick, right? So when it comes to quilting the borders of your quilts, there's a lot of different ways you can go about it, even if you're working on a sewing machine or a long arm. And tip number one, my favorite easy pass on quilting borders is just to quilt something in the corners. So instead of doing an intricate, repeating design that kind of continues around the quilt, I can just quilt something fancy in those corners, call it good, and move on with a different filler. Now that's going to be something I do if I'm working with a busy fabric, if I need to get this quilt done really fast, or if I'm just not totally loving the quilt itself, which sometimes happens. All right, tip number two. If you noticed, most of the designs, 5 out of 6 of the designs that we learned could be quilted in chunks. Now I know that sounds kind of weird, but when you can break your quilting design up into chunks, it makes it easier to transition in and out of the border in the middle of the quilt. So this is where it gets a little confusing when I'm just talking, but you have to use your imagination for me, okay? You could either do the border all at one time, save it for the end, or do it at the beginning, quilt that whole border, or if you can transition in between the border and the middle of the quilt and back and forth, that means you'll be able to hit those areas and quilt them while you're there. Now, if you work on a long arm, I'm sure you already know the benefit of that, right? Horizontal borders, no problem. Vertical borders, a little different. So I'm going to give you a quick little example of what I'm talking about. It's pretty low tech, but I think you'll forgive me for it. So I have a quilt right here, but what I'm actually pulling out is my handy paper and pen. So I'm going to pretend that these are the borders that I'm working with. And what I'm going to do is pick designs that can be quilted in chunks so that I can transition from one border to the next. So let's pretend, for whatever reason, I'm just doing a back and forth line here. As I progress down the border, I'm just going to get as far as I can go. And then when I can't move any further, whether it's having to reposition the quilt or whatever reason, I'm going to stop when I'm touching the edge of the border. Now this is important because that's going to be my gateway into the next border. So if I'm looking at a quilt with multiple borders, I'm going to say, oh, I need to pick designs that are going to touch and be broken into chunks so I can transition in and out. Now once I'm at that point where I can hop on over to the other one, then what I'm going to do is just go right back up the border, go right back up the next border, quilting the next design. So let's just do, our little, this is where you can see how bad I draw, especially across my body, but we get the idea. And again, I'm going to stop when I'm touching the edge of the border. So really what I'm doing is going from one to the next to the next. And I'm just going to keep repeating, depending on how many borders there are, working my way across the area. Now, this could be the whole border. This could just be the chunk that you're at. Really, it's whatever helps you handle that efficiently. But once I get to that last border, I'm going to go ahead and let's just say I do a back and forth line until I get to the bottom of my area. Now, at this point, I can either reposition the quilt or, move on my long arm, but then I'll keep going down. So now I'm going to work my way back the way I just came, going down, except this time I'm going to touch on this side because this is the way that I'm heading to my left. And so from there, then I can go into my next design, trying really hard to make it match up, make it look better than that, and hooking right into the next design. And so I can effectively work my way back and forth, quilting those chunks and moving on. So that's how I'm going to work my way around the borders. Now you might notice that means there's going to be these transition areas where I'm going in and out or I'm tweaking the design to make it fit the little bit of area I have, but it's more efficient and I'm totally fine with those little sneaks or cheating areas where I kind of get into that next border. And here's the thing, if I'm doing it once, I'm doing it repetitively down the border. So if once is a mistake, then twice is definitely a design choice, right? I think we can agree on that. Tip number 3 for quilting borders, if you can't break your design up into chunks or get it to touch the other area, what you can do is use your quilting to break the border up into chunks. It's kind of the same thing, just a little different. So let's look at this quilt right here. I have this long border, and I just use quilting lines to break the border up into a manageable section. So this would be ideal if your borders are really big, they're really long, or you want to do a design in there that doesn't work over a bigger area. The benefit to this, of course, is it takes that whole long border and it breaks it into chunks. It's kind of like taking one little bite out of it and then the next bite and the next bite. So as you're progressing along, you're just kind of using the quilting to define the area. And if you're going to do it, own it, make it look intentional. So you could see, even if I go back to the quilting here, even my lines, I echoed them a couple times because now I can say, well, that's part of the design that I'm doing. And you can see a couple other examples up here. So just really using the quilting to break it up and make it work for me. I think that's what's great about quilting. You can make it fit your preferences and make it work for what you're doing. So those are my 3 handy tips for quilting borders. Makes it a little bit easier to work with. I'd love to hear yours, so later on after the video is over, you can leave those in the comments section. I bet some other people would benefit from your ideas as well. So there was a couple questions already. I'm going to go ahead and answer those that were posted on the Facebook group, and I'll be putting links to everything I talk about in the description box in a little bit. But I'll answer questions here, but please go ahead and ask them on here. So love to answer your questions. I'll go right to it. So Vicky says, will you be getting in those quilting gloves soon? Oh my gosh, the gloves, the infamous gloves. Well, I kind of call them sexy gloves because I love how, they just look pretty. So when I ordered my first batch, I ordered 100, sold out in an hour. So I thought, oh, I'll order more. I'll order a couple hundred, sold out in an afternoon. So finally I called them up and said, how many do you have in stock? I'll take them all. So the next time we get a shipment in, I'll have a little bit more and it will last longer, hopefully, than the afternoon. So Vicki, they should be in the next couple weeks, depending on if they get caught up in customs or not. That's one of the joys of international shipping, right? But trust me, you all will know as soon as those come in. Lyndon, hello from sunny Southern California. Love all your help. I'm starting your negative space quilt this week. A little nervous, but confident because of you. So here's a trick to quilting a lot of areas of negative space. Use a matching thread color that blends in, and just know that when you're done, all you're going to see is the overall texture. If everything is filled in consistently, your eye won't know where to focus on. You'll just see all of it. So I know it's hard when your face is 2 inches from the quilt, but just trust me on this. When you get done, you wash it, nobody's going to notice any errors, and you're not going to point them out, right? And also a thinner thread. So if I have time, if I have some stuff to talk about, we'll talk about threads in a little bit. Vicky says, good day, Angela. How would you approach a really wide border? Honestly, how I approach a border depends less on the width of it and more about the fabric that it's pieced with. So if it's a busier fabric, if it's like a fabric you can't even see the quilting anyway, I'm just going to do whatever I want. If it is a part of a quilt that, there's something really intricate on the inside, so I don't need a whole lot of stuff going on around the outside, then I'm going to do something more basic. However, if let's say I piece the quilt and it's not pieced very well, so I need to do some creative quilting in the borders to really kind of detract from that, then I'm going to put more emphasis on the quilting. So with really wide borders, I'm probably going to quilt a feather or a really big design to go quickly. Of course, what you could also do is use the quilting to break it up into 2 smaller borders, although since I don't love quilting borders, that's probably not what I'm going to do, but have fun with that. Okay, so Joy McGraw asked a question on the Facebook group. She asked, how do I divide up the borders before I start quilting? So you noticed some of the designs really kind of fit a regimented pattern. And so the question is, how do you make it fit? Now, this is the part of any Q&A where those perfectionists out there, or the people that have more attention to detail, get a little itchy on the back of their neck when I say this, but I just eyeball it. So as I'm progressing through the border and I'm going and everything is fine, when I start to see that corner come, the turning point, that's when I stop and kind of project my next couple steps and stretch them out or squish them together, to really kind of make that happen. Now that freaks everybody out because, oh, I don't know if it's going to be perfect. Well, if you spread that difference out over a couple of different sections, it's not as noticeable. However, you can also use a stencil. So the Designs with Lines stencil, one of my favorite things. It's so basic, but it helps out so much. You can mark your block or your border into 2-inch lines or 2-inch sections. So that's a good, helpful hint. But also, chances are, if you're putting that border on something, it's probably a quilt with blocks. So you can use the piecing as a guide. So if you have a repeating block structure, use that. Even if it means that some are wider and some are narrower, if it's consistently inconsistent, it's fine. So Joy, that's how I would handle that. David says, is there a big difference between the Handy Quilter Sweet 16 and the Baby Lock Tiara? So no, not really. So Handy Quilter makes those for Baby Lock and they're branded for Baby Lock. So the biggest thing there would be getting a good dealer that's going to take care of you. Stevie says, do I tie or bury my beginning ends and threads or just do smaller stitches and snip those off? What do you think? Guess. Okay, obviously I'm going to snip those off. I just take a few stitches in place, snip them off, and move on. Now here's the thing about this. Don't do what I suggest and try to win a ribbon at a quilt show. This is what I do for the quilts that I love and I want to get finished. But if you think about quilting, every stitch is like a knot, so that isn't going to just fall out. I really think that burying your threads comes from hand quilting, where you just have one thread working its way through the quilt. And if that's the case, then yeah, you're going to need to bury your threads so that doesn't work its way out. Or maybe that's just what I tell myself to feel a little better about my quilting efficiencies. We won't call it laziness, but it is a little bit of laziness. Oh my gosh. Okay, Susan, I think you represent every other quilter. So you've been sewing for 35 years, but free motion quilting is a little tricky, hoping to master this type of quilting, and thank you for being a leader in quilting. Well, first, thank you for watching. I can't lead if nobody's watching or following, and honestly, doing this challenge has been so much fun. I enjoy the coming up with the plans. I enjoy doing the videos and having these live Q&As. They're just going to keep being a very big component of the challenges moving forward. So I hope that you're loving them as well. However, Susan, so if you've been sewing for 35 years, you probably are really good at making sure things are where they need to go and you have the pattern and it has to be right. I'm assuming I don't make clothes, but if my armhole is down by my hip, that's not going to work, right? So sometimes close enough is good enough doesn't really help in sewing. But then what happens is you come into the quilting arena, and even if the quilt's not flat, it can still lay on you. And even if, it's wonky or it's not pieced well, it could still be used and functional. So it's a little bit of a different mindset. But then you come to one of my videos and I'm like, just do whatever. It doesn't matter. Throw something in there. And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. So you almost have to think of it as using a different side of your brain. So more like a doodling, less like pattern following. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. But you have to embrace the suck. It's going to suck at first because it's a new skill. We suck at everything we start out at. Well, most of us. It's driving a car, learning how to write, anything like that. So Susan, just give yourself some grace, practice consistently, follow one of the challenges, and I guarantee you'll see improvement from the beginning to the end. You improve every time you practice. And I know this for a fact because I teach classes all the time. We'll be 5 minutes in and I can already see marked improvement in my students. So just go for it. You're going to do awesome. Vicki, will I be bringing stencils, gloves, and rulers to the classes I'm teaching in New Zealand this October? I know, I'm so excited. I get to go to New Zealand and Perth. I'm going to just, hit that whole side of the world while I'm over there. I will not be bringing product because the symposium does not want teachers selling product. So hopefully we can find some of that out there on the floor market or the vendor mall for you. I'm not sure. I'm sorry, Vicki. I wish I could help you. These are such good questions. Oh my gosh, I had even a list, but you all are asking such good stuff. So Jackie, good question. Do I ever feel a quilt looks way too busy with all the different quilting designs? So here's a part of the little Q&A where I get to say, you get to do what you like. So I'm only the expert of my opinion. I only know what I like. And I like a lot of quilting. I think you put too much on there and you throw some more on top. However, not everybody likes that. And so you're going to do what you think looks good. Now I will say that I try to use a matching thread color so that all those different designs don't overwhelm the quilt top. Because I do want the quilting to highlight the quilt, not detract from the piecing. So, you know, I want people to say, oh my gosh, that quilt is beautiful, and then a split second later, go over and look at the quilting. Too many quilting designs can be detracting if the right thread isn't used. So that's kind of where it's going to be. Teresa, I'm new to long arm and free motion quilting right now. I have a donation quilt for a child on my long arm. I've got quilter's block. I definitely need a lot of practice. Any suggestions? What I love about charity quilts is that there's plenty of them that need to be quilted. A lot of people will piece them perfect, you know, which is awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. But then they need somebody to quilt them, and there's no pressure, right? The person that you're giving that quilt to is going to love it. It's going to comfort them. It's going to honor them. It's going to do this thing for them, and they're going to love it. So you have to remember that when you're quilting. Now, as far as quilting suggestions, it's really hard to say without seeing the quilt. However, since you don't have the pressure of it being a customer's quilt or a quilt that you know you spent hours and hours and hours piecing, I think you try as many different designs as you can think of. So if there's a repeating block, usually charity quilts, I would say most of them, with the exceptions of Quilts of Valor, tend to be more basic in the construction. So pick a different design for each block, or pick a different design for the sashings. And if you're using that matching thread color, it's not going to overwhelm it, but it's going to be a good practice for you. And especially if it's for a child, they're going to be engaged with all the different designs. We can call it like a textured quilting or something. Give it a good, reference for the child. It's going to be really good for their brain to feel the different textures or something. But I think that's what you should do. Barbara, I will not be in Paducah. Can you believe I've never been to Paducah since I feel like that's kind of like a bad, like I should be at Paducah sometime. It's kind of on the quilter's bucket list, right? So one of these days I'll have to get down there. Tatiana, hey, how are you? I will be coming to the Festival of Quilts again. I think that's in 2020. So look for me there. Okay, so a question that came through on Facebook was, do I try to keep the feather meander the same size in the swirl? So the last video, we did that feather meander and it wrapped around. So it's not so much the size of the swirl or the size of the feather that determines the density, it's the size of those petals. And that is a good question, Kelly, because I didn't say that in the video. The size of the petals will determine how dense or less dense it is. And so I'm trying to keep those petals somewhat the same size, but it's a very forgiving design. Even if they're not the same size, it's still going to look really good. So the main idea is I'm trying to get into that momentum, trying to get into that rhythm so that will help me keep it consistent, but just know that it comes with practice, right? When you learned how to write your name, it was all over the place, but then you kind of got more consistent with it. So good question, Kelly. And then part two to her question, best question, how do I get the quilts to land perfectly at the end of a Midnight Quilt Show episode? So you know the end of the Midnight Quilt Show where I'm like, I had so much fun quilting this quilt, it was great, I love this, and blah, blah, blah. And you see the quilt kind of flop on the floor, right? And so there's a lot of big quilts that I make on that show. And so I've been asked that a couple times, how do we get them to land? Now, if I was being mean, I would say, I work very hard at my quilt tossing ability, but actually the crew does that. So after we're done filming, they move everything out of the way and then they take turns launching the quilt and having it fall. And not only does it need to fall pretty much flat and in frame, their shadow can't be in it. So they have to kind of throw it up and jump back real quick. And it's kind of impressive to watch. So I think that should be the next quilting marathon thing, is just the quilt tossing championship. I've never tried it. It doesn't look like fun to me, but the crew kind of gets into it and see who can get it on the first throw. So, which rarely does it go on the first throw. Okay, so that's the questions I have on there. Oh, Mary Smith, this is awesome. Do I label my quilts? I do, and it would make you cringe when you saw it. So usually I label my quilts because they're in an exhibit, and an exhibit requires that they be labeled. So I'm like, well, crap, I've got 20 quilts and no labels on any of them, so I just write on the back of them with a Sharpie. Yeah, that usually does not get very good responses at guilds, but I know. Oh, hey, Miss Feyra. Yes, can I clarify any pattern changes for the most recent challenge? I think I've heard there were some changes for piecing the back. Oh, there were. So, yeah, it is what it is. I calculated wrong. So on the blocks for the pieced backing for this challenge, if you have a kit, which, or if you're making your own, it's the measurements have been adjusted, and it's available on the Facebook group in the files section. So you can find it there with the updated information. But here's the good thing. The error I made the blocks too big, so you can just trim them down as well. So, oh my gosh, the quilt tassing outtakes, I think that would be hilarious. I think next time I'll try to get a video of them doing it. It's hilarious just to watch them moving around, especially when you have those big quilts and they're just like, oh, throwing them up. So funny. Let's see. Sorry, I get kind of distracted. Okay, good. This is a question I get asked a lot. Catherine, if I have a different color backing to my quilt top, do I use a different color thread in my bobbin? So, no. When I'm looking at my quilt, and especially if I'm quilting on my sewing machine or I'm talking to a newer quilter, as you move and progress the quilt, you're not going to have perfect tension all the time. So what can happen is that bobbin thread's going to pull up to the top and show up on the top, or vice versa. And if it's the same color, you're not going to see it. So it makes everything better. Now, just hiding the problems doesn't work anywhere else. It doesn't work in money or makeup, but in quilting it does, so that's awesome. Now, here's the thing about that though. If I have a hot pink top and a white backing, that means I'm going to use hot pink thread on the top and the back. And as soon as I say that, half the people are like, awesome. I'm like, I know, you get 2 sides of the quilting for the price of 1. Half of the people are like, no, I don't want anybody to be able to see my quilting on the back. So if you don't, I would suggest, and of course you can do what you'd like, but I would suggest a busier backing in the same color as your quilt top. And this comes from personal experience. That hot pink and that white quilt, I had a customer say, can I use 2 different thread colors? And when your brain is saying, no, for the love of God, don't do it. And you say, sure, I can do it. Well, it did not turn out good because the pink showed up on the back, the white showed up on the top, and she was not happy. So, moral of the story, I try to match the thread colors. Now, I don't worry about the weight or the type of thread. I don't think it has to be the same exact thread, just the same color-ish, like within a range. Now, I should throw in that I'm kind of become a little addicted to pre-wounds. They're kind of like drugs. Like somebody gives you one for free and you're like, oh, I'll try it. And the next thing you know, you have all the pre-wounds. So I do sometimes not match the backing bobbin thread to the top because maybe I don't have the right color, but I will find a neutral in the same value. So if it's a medium gray quilt, or let's say a medium red quilt, I'll look for a medium tan or a medium gray in the bottom thread. So it's kind of funny. It's like, I do it, but then, I say don't do it, and then I do it. What are you going to do? All the things. Angie, wasn't Spokane so much fun? I just got back from Spokane, and she said she was so excited she completely forgot about her questions. How did I get started with Craftsy or Blueprint? So yeah, that's a fun story. Here's the thing, when you try something, whether it's in business and whether it's in personal life, you put yourself out there. You try stuff that doesn't work, because what's the worst thing that can happen? It doesn't work. So you try stuff that you don't know if it'll work, because what's the worst that'll happen? It might work or it might not. You never know, but you've tried. So I was pitching or promoting my first book or my second book or one of those books, and Heather Grant from the Modern Quilt Guild had said, hey, you really should probably contact somebody at Craftsy about teaching a class. And I had no idea who they were, what they did. They were really kind of new in that space. And so I just emailed. I was like, hey, do you want to meet at Market? And I didn't even do my research on the company, which is not smart. I should have done a little more research. And I met with the gal that was in charge of acquisitions, and I said, I'd like to teach a class. She's like, okay. And so we did. And so, that's led to more classes. It's led to Midnight Quilt Show and Quilt-alongs, a lot of fun stuff. But I will tell you this, when I started, I was camera shy. I know, it's shocking right now. You're kind of shocked, I'm sure. Just because I can talk to people doesn't mean I could talk to a camera. And that first day, first class, they came, filmed, I went home and I went to bed and I told my husband, they're going to cancel it. Tomorrow they're going to say, never mind, we're going home, we're not filming this, because I felt like I did so bad. But when you are bad at something, you have two choices, right? You either lean into it and you master it, or you avoid it. And there's nothing wrong with avoiding it, but I leaned into it. And I said, you know what, I want to get good at this because I could guess that this was going to be a future thing. And so I took every video opportunity I could take. I talked to myself in the mirror. I read books and a lot of practice. And so it's kind of funny now. It's all kind of come full circle. And now I'm sitting in front of the camera, pretending I'm talking directly to you and not to this camera, but we're still having a good conversation. Great questions, everybody. So real quick, so one of the question was, when is the next challenge, right? This one's over, so it's like, obviously we need some other stuff to practice. So the next challenge will be announced the beginning of June. I know you might be like, oh, it's so long, but I'm working on some really fun stuff. So just be patient. It's coming along and we'll be able to launch that and it's gonna be good. Let's just say I'm really investing into this and this is gonna be a thing. Like this challenge thing, I'm loving it. It's gonna keep being a thing. But in the meantime, what do we do, right? Like without that? Well, let's just say, I think you should start digging into your UFOs because we're gonna do an informal help, how do I quilt it? So I haven't got the details yet. I'll put them out as soon as I have them, but I'm thinking weekly chats like this where I help you decide how to quilt your quilts depending on if you wanna highlight the pattern, the fabric, the inspiration behind it, etc. So a little, not quite a challenge, but a little bit like a different challenge where I'm challenging you to finish your quilts. And so a lot of fun stuff like that. So that will be coming out soon, so stay tuned. And then got a giveaway, yay! So giveaways are awesome. Let me show you what we got here. So this is like the end of the challenge giveaway. So Glide Thread has given me a rainbow of threads. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of wanted to just keep these for myself, but I'm not going to. Oh look, they're out of color order. There we go. So one lucky winner is gonna win those threads. And so what you need to do to win, and I'll put the details in the description box below, is just post a picture of your challenge quilt. Now, I was thinking I would make you finish it first, but I won't do that. Just post a picture of your challenge quilt, saying what you've learned, a picture of your quilting, something that this challenge has helped you with. And you can post it on Instagram or on the Facebook group, and I'm gonna pick one winner from all of those. So one winner is gonna get 6 little spools of thread in an array of colors. So definitely lots of fun. Okay, so I'm gonna check back 1 second. Teresa, I use a ton of Glide. I love thread. I like to joke that, quilting is my therapy, threads are my meds. Brenda, Brenda. Okay, so Brenda was in my class at Spokane and she said, were you a teacher prior to this? I'm like, no, I worked at Burger King as a fast food manager. But in the middle of my class, while teaching, I'm trying to be professional, my goat at home is having babies and the babies are doing well. So 4 of my goats have given birth, all while I wasn't there. But I have 7 adorable babies laying around. Okay, all right, y'all. So thanks so much for joining me. Thank you so much for quilting along with me in this challenge. Definitely post pictures, not just for the giveaway, but for other things too. And then also be sure to let me know if you have any questions. I'm gonna kind of poke through here and try to answer what I can. Also put some more details in the description box. But if you need quilting inspiration, if you need some motivation, definitely check out the Facebook group because people post pictures there all the time. They answer each other's questions. And I think we've done a really good job of creating this environment that's very encouraging. And so a big thank you to Feyre who helps me admin all that and keep track of everything because that thing is just getting bigger and bigger. And I will be back soon with more details about the next challenge. So go ahead and finish up your quilt or go ahead and find some UFOs to pull out because we're gonna knock through some of those quilts in the meantime. So thanks so much and happy quilting.